Talk to us a little bit about more formally the evidence for yoga. Is there any evidence for yoga, Fanika?
Yeah. Again, interest in yoga-based research has really kind of grown, especially in the last decade or two. Yoga is a practice that has been around for ages. It's an ancient practice, but in terms of therapeutic applications, that's only something that's recently garnered interest. And I would say in the last decade or two, as I said, research has really skyrocketed. There are definitely challenges currently with the yoga research landscape, but definitely some really positive studies as well. So with respect to depression, yoga is actually recommended in Canadian depression treatment guidelines as a second line adjunctive treatment. And then there have been several systematic reviews and meta-analyses done. One recent one, which was done in 2021, showed that yoga was helpful, had moderate reductions in depressive symptoms across a variety of psychiatric conditions. So schizophrenia, bipolar, anxiety, major depression. And this review actually showed that it was dose dependent. So the more, the better. There have been studies looking at, for example, people with treatment resistant depression who are already on antidepressants and yoga as an add-on. And they showed that the yoga group, showed greater improvements in depressive symptoms compared to the control group. There was a study recently done that compared yoga to cognitive behavioral therapy to a stress education group for folks with generalized anxiety disorder, and showed that yoga was helpful for anxiety symptoms, more helpful than stress education, but not quite as helpful as CBT, which is the gold standard. So this was a really nice study because it kind of, to your earlier question, kind of compared yoga to treatments that already exist, and also, included participants with a kind of a diagnosed mental health condition like generalized anxiety disorder. But there's been studies on yoga for schizophrenia, PTSD, ADHD in children, adolescents, at schools. It's really kind of for stress reduction. So a lot of literature out there. Though I would say there are, sometimes challenges with the quality of the study. Not all, there's a lack of kind of robust randomized trials and so forth, but definitely there is lots out there.
Yeah. As I understand, in the last decade or so, there have been some, randomized controlled trials showing its efficacy, and like you said, the systematic reviews and meta-analyses showing a range of mental health challenges and mental illnesses. So certainly, my take on it is that the evidence is there, but there's a long way to go in terms of, like you said, robustness, but also like the heterogeneity between different yoga practices, right? Because as I understand it, there are dozens, if not scores, of different practices.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I would say that is one of the biggest challenges of the current kind of research landscape. So yoga, when a lot of people, when they think of yoga, they think of postures, but that is actually just one, part of the greater practice, which can include things like breath work, meditation, lifestyle, ethics, values. There are so many different lineages and traditions and adaptations. And even when you look at the literature, some interventions are posture only, some are just meditation and breath work, some are more integrative and holistic. So there's so much heterogeneity, and there's no widespread kind of standardized protocol. So it's really hard to study because we're studying different things, right? Which definitely makes the research challenging. So yeah, that's a really good point around the heterogeneity.
Yeah, okay. Can you, again, recognizing that there is heterogeneity or variance between the studies and the interventions, can you give us an insight as to what a yoga intervention for mental health might look like? Either one that you've seen in one of these RCTs, randomized controlled trials, or one that you've delivered yourself. Just give us an insight into kind of the nuts and bolts of it.
So it can vary. Maybe I'll preface by saying there's yoga classes, and I credit this distinction to Chris Brems, who's the director of. So Stanford actually has its own yoga teacher training program that's focused on bringing yoga into healthcare, called Yoga X, and so that's run by Chris Brems, who's a wonderful psychologist and a yoga teacher. She kind of divides these interventions into three. So there's yoga classes that you would, find in your community at the local gym. And then there's therapeutic yoga. So that's yoga with therapeutic intention for a certain kind of physical or mental challenge, often done in groups. And then there's yoga therapy, which requires additional training beyond the standard yoga teacher training. And it's typically one-on-one. And it's utilizing yoga kind of in therapeutic ways for a specific condition. The interventions really vary. For example, a yoga for stress reduction group. And so that involves, stress education, and then practices like postures, breath work, meditation, value clarification, community contribution, kind of pulling in some of the other kind of limbs of yoga. So, that's kind of one example of what kind of an integrative, holistic kind of therapeutic yoga intervention might look like.
Yeah, okay, so that's really interesting. The yoga for stress reduction intervention that you're running. So, are the different components that you're running in that intervention, are they all yoga centric, or are you pulling in, so values clarification sounds like something I've seen in acceptance and commitment therapy, for example. Are you pulling in different parts from different therapy modalities, or is it all under the umbrella of yoga, if you like?
One particular yoga theory is the 8 limbs of yoga. So that involves what we call yamas and niyamas, which are the ethical, value, lifestyle limbs, and then postures, breath work, and then different limbs of inner practices, including sensory practices, meditation practices. I'm personally pulling in kind of some modern psychology stuff too, but the values stuff also does overlap with some of the ethical, lifestyle, and value limbs of yoga. So I kind of all back to your point, right? Yoga is such a broad, diverse practice. It really was intended to be a lifestyle. And so different practitioners will focus on different things based on their experience. And then obviously as a psychiatrist, I'm going to be tempted to pull in some modern psychology and all of that as well.